Well, hello everybody. Bart here. Today, a rainy, dreary day in Indianapolis. We are supposed to be having the finals for the Red Bull Air races, and I worry they might have to cancel the race. The cloud cover has to be more than 1,500 feet AGL, and I don't know if they're gonna have it. It's gusty winds. And what a change from yesterday when it was sunny, cloudless, and 80 degrees outside. I guess at least they have a real nice qualifying day, but what a shame. But anyway, on to the Mrs. Beach. I picked her up on Friday from the second annual under my ownership. And I thought, wishful thinking, that second annual is gonna start being a little easier on the wallet. Because, well, you know, we've addressed a lot of stuff. All of the items that were found by the Bonanza clinic were addressed, and smooth sailing, right? Wrong. There's never such a thing as shortage of cash to be spending on an aircraft, and this year was no exception. In addition to the maintenance stuff, which were not major, for instance, replace the front tire due to some weathering, you know, like cracks and things, and replacing one of the muffler cones. The flame cone was deteriorating, so the muffler was replaced. Of course, we didn't replace just the cone. The entire muffler was replaced. It's $300, and we used the one with Iconel, which is the alloy that's a lot more heat resistant. So hopefully this muffler will last a lot longer. So, you know, not something terrible, but I got to pay for 2 new fuel cells. That's right. Somewhat expected, actually. The airplane is 1982, and these are original, so 35 years they've been here in the airplane, and I think we've got our money worth out of them. But anyway, maybe wasn't expecting doing 2 of them at the same time, and I'll explain to you why, and I saved them for the purpose of this video, and hopefully maybe I can donate them somewhere for educational or whatever. Whoever wants them for educational purposes can have them. I'm done with them. But anyway, let's get started. So, about a month ago when I was landing, I noticed a faint fuel smell in the cockpit. And first I thought, maybe that's the exhaust I'm smelling. But then I thought to myself, it's probably not the exhaust, because I just started noticing the smell. And then I noticed that the smell is a lot stronger. I smell it when the fuel tanks are full, which led me to think maybe it's a fuel leak from the fuel cells. And sure enough, at the most common spot, which is right here under the jack pad, I noticed a little bit of a stain, but not a lot, just a tiny little bit, but which made me investigate. First thing I thought is, well, let's look into the excess cover here underneath this and the sender and see what condition the gasket is, and are these tight? Maybe there's a leak there. And sure enough, as I'll show you on this picture, there was maybe a leak there. And after tightening these bolts that were under the sender and also the opening, the fuel leak and the smell and everything seemed to stop. Wow, I thought, I'm home free. I'm going to, I dodged a bullet basically. Well, I went to the, I met with the Eagle Cell guys over the Bonanza Society 50th celebration. They had a booth there, and so I stopped at their booth, and I told them what happened and what we did. Basically tighten these bolts were just loose, and they said, well, maybe you should replace the gaskets under the sender and also these openings. And they gave me, free of charge, was super nice of them, they gave me the gaskets. So I thought, well, that's nice. So I gave them to Dan, my mechanic, and I told him, hey, during the annual, just prophylactically, just replace those. And then I got that phone call that everybody gets and everybody dreads. And the phone call goes something like this. Hey Bart, this is your mechanic, and just call me back, I need to talk to you about something. And that something was this vent delaminating from the fuel cell. If you believe I can stick my finger inside of the fuel cell. Now, I've played with it some, and I've enlarged this hole. It wasn't as bad, but this is where the leak was. it was draining, it was leaking down, probably underneath the cell, running all along the length of the fuel cell, and then dripping down, and then maybe I was also smelling the fumes, right, or the fuel, and it was collecting down the bottom. So, new fuel cell. Now, I thought maybe it would be a good opportunity, since we have this old fuel cell here, to kind of walk through the fuel cell system on a Bonanza, because I don't know if everybody has a really good understanding how it actually is, how it actually functions, and what are the various ports and connections. So with this kind of a tool, meaning the old fuel cell, this makes a perfect opportunity. So let's start at the beginning, as they say, and let's walk through it. So naturally, this is your drain. These are these drains that are notorious for breaking off and causing the premature fuel cell replacements. And as you can see, mine doesn't have too far to go. You see the cracks when I pull on it? It was in reasonable shape. It wasn't leaking, but it definitely was about to go, given the cracks here. This is your inlet to the system. So in other words, this is where your fuel supply is to the fuel selector valve. Inside here, and I don't know if I can picture this, but there is a pocket in here with a zipper and a flapper valve, and the fuel goes in there and gets kind of trapped in there to prevent unporting of that of the fuel supply when making a sharp turnoff, you know, say upon takeoff with low fuel in the cell, or steep turns, that kind of a thing. So that's in here. And then again, this is like a baffle here, if you will, or like a little pocket with a zipper and then a little flapper valve that kind of lets the fuel in and traps it in there. Here you have just an excess cover, and there's a cover on here and a cork gasket. Here you have a fuel sender, one of two. There are two of them per wing on the A36. These are snaps. This is what snaps on the top of the wing into like a receptacle. I'll show you a picture how that all looks. And then moving on to the end of the other side of the wing. Here obviously is your fuel. This is where you would fuel that cell. There's a little reinforcement here, you know, so if you jab it with a fuel hose, if you are the nozzle, it will not puncture the tank. And this is the second fuel sender. So how it works is they're connected in series, the senders, and then when one reaches low, or you know, touches the bottom of the tank, if you will, then the second one picks up. So they're connected in tandem, if you will, and that's how you get an accurate fuel reading with the tank as the fuel drains from the tank, or as you consume the fuel. And then onto these. So this is a vent, and I'll explain the function of this. And this is your fuel return. So your fuel selector and a fuel pump has a return. So then extra fuel, if you will, that's, you know, that is not taken into the engine, if you will, it gets returned into the tank via this port here. So now on to this one. This is the kind of the important part. So this is the vent here, and the vent has two connections, if you will. It's teed into a vent here, and then there is another line that goes into your vent by the root of the wing. And actually there are two vents in here, you can see. The one that is bent like this, and that's very important, needs to be bent at a 10-degree angle, and the open needs to face into the airstream. And there also is, this is an older manual from a 36 model. The newer ones have a little hole drilled in there. But anyway, this needs to be bent into the airstream to prevent the pressuring of the fuel cell. And anyway, so that's one of those. And the second one was what they call them ice-free vents. It's flush with the wing, and that's the one that you can I'll show it to you in a second here. They're teed and routed here and routed into this vent. But there's another very important piece, and that is called a check. There's a check valve, and that's routed to a vent as well. And that check valve prevents from siphoning the fuel through the vent in case there's a vacuum created. And you might have seen sometimes upon fueling the fuel would just pour out of this vent here, out of the, just stream down. And one of the reasons why it's doing it is there is a vacuum, just like a siphoning creating, just like siphoning the fuel from the tank by suctioning on the tube and suctioning to fuel of the car. If you ever done that, it's the same physical principle, but and you can empty the tank by doing this actually, if you just let it continue. This check valve allows the air from the outside break that siphoning action, and this is I think it's also called Anti-Siphon drain valve or something like that. And it's important that that valve operates correctly, because otherwise you can potentially lose the fuel in your tank. Maybe also when the fuel expands, right, and starts siphoning out, if this valve doesn't break that siphoning action, that can also happen. So that's basically the setup of this fuel cell and the fuel system in a nutshell. Couple other things maybe I should show you. While I was doing the fuel cells, we opted for these flush drain valves from Eagle. By that, you can also pick 0.05 knots of airspeed. So this is an air mod in addition to being a fuel mod. And the advantage of this, Eagle told me that the fuels these days, they have some additives, and he gave me the chemical composition, but anyway, they destroy a lot of those O-rings in the traditional valves. If you notice, if you replace the traditional valves, they last a year or two and then you have a leak again. That's because these O-rings get destroyed by the fuel, the additives that are in the fuel. So these apparently last a lot longer. So we shall see. But I like the fact that they're flush and and most importantly, you don't, by draining the fuel, you don't really move on that drain, so you don't have the problem of ripping the drain out of the fuel tank like with the other valves. So that is an improvement, and it's I think $200 kit that is SDC'd, and you file the 337, or the mechanic does file the 337 and gets that taken care of via and when he installs it. And the fuel cells here, again, I opted for the Eagle ones, about $1,700 a piece, and plus installation. Now I did the taping, and I show you the pictures of how this looks, but the taping wasn't bad because I didn't let the situation get bad very long. In other words, we caught it right away, and therefore the fuel didn't really destroy any of the other tape that was in there. If you let it go too long, you have a lot of leak. Basically all that glue from the tape turns into this messy goo, and then you have a problem on your hands. I spent about 2 hours per side by cleaning and retaping and everything, which is not bad at all. It wasn't actually as bad as I thought. With A36, you've got a pretty giant openings here to reach in there, and the worst problem is maybe kind of right here, because your hand kind of reaches maybe up to here, and then this is really the worst. But this actually area was pristine on mine, so I got lucky. Now let me show you the other cell, why we replaced it. It wasn't leaking again, but when Dan was trying to install that flush valve on the other cell so they two match, look, this reinforcement ring that's underneath it was completely delaminated from the cell. There's supposed to be a ring like this. See how it's attached, if you will, and that was gone basically, fell into the fuel tank. And 35 years on the fuel cell, you're on borrowed time, right? So that just get them done. And I am hoping, I'm 41 years old, I get 35 years, so by the time I retire, I'll have to worry about another fuel cell. Or maybe I won't live that long, so I don't have to worry about the fuel cells again. So that's a good deal. So yeah, that's the ins and outs, if you will, of the fuel cell on an A36. I hope you found this informative. And if you do have any questions, please write them below, and I'll try my best to respond to you and answer them. Thank you for watching.